Welcome to the Peugeot 205 Turbo 16. This is not a GTI, it's not a rally, but it's a Turbo 16. And this car is a homologated Group B car, and so everything about it is different from the standard Peugeot 205. In fact, really all it shares are the lights and the silhouette, which was the nature of Group B. So a little background, I guess we'll start with the 205. The 205 is Peugeot's first sort of modern image-making hot hatch, and by that I mean they had a reputation for making pretty conservative stuff up until this point. Stuff like the 403 and the 504 and stuff like that. In any case, the 205 was a small car, just an economy car that had a fair amount of appeal to it and made the basis for going racing.
More than 35 years after its demise, Group B remains legendary. A new formula for 1982, it lasted just 5 seasons before being phased out because the cars were just too fast. The regulatory limitations were so few that manufacturers were able to field some of the most outrageous competition cars of all time. Spectators loved it, but a series of tragic accidents culminating with the death of Henry Toivonen at the Rallye de Corse in May of 1986 resulted in the cancellation of the series before the season was even over. As Group B evolved and the manufacturers figured out how to make the most of what few rules existed, this car, the Peugeot 205 Turbo 16, emerged as one of the cars to beat. It won the manufacturer's championship both years that it raced, 1985 and 86, which were the last 2 years of Group B. In doing so, it beat back a stout challenge from the Lancia Delta S4 and dethroned Audi's Quattro, which was too big and heavy to compete, even in remarkable short-wheelbase Sport Quattro form. The rules required the construction of just 200 road versions of a car in order to race it in Group B, compared to 5,000 cars in Group A, which replaced it. This meant that the homologated road cars could be very wild indeed, since so few needed to find customers that were wealthy and brave enough to buy them. Certainly it took a special customer to buy one of these, since it cost as much as a Porsche 911 or 6 times as much as a 205 GTI. Although Lancia periodically exercised some optimism when it came to stating their production numbers to satisfy the homologation requirement, Peugeot dutifully produced the required 200 road cars. 219, in fact. Never offered in the United States, these cars are forbidden fruit of the highest order.
So what's the 205 Turbo 16 like to drive? Well, it's very hard if you're going slow, and apparently it's very hard if you're going fast, although I will admit fully that I did not go that fast in this car, at least not by my standards. So I didn't go 10/10ths in this car, because it's not mine and it costs as much as a house does in this region of Italy.
Nominally based on the 205 economy car, the Turbo 16 shares basically nothing with that car. The entire back of the chassis was cut off, and the engine moved to the back where it was mounted amidships driving all 4 wheels.
It's not really surprising that the 205 Turbo 16 drives so differently from the 205 GTI or any other 205 variant because it shares almost nothing with those cars. The body shell started as a 205 standard body shell, and then they cut the whole back of it off, and actually much of the front as well, and put completely new suspension on it. The engine was moved from being transversely mounted front-wheel drive to mounted amidships with 4-wheel drive, and so the experience is basically not at all comparable to the 205. Control forces are really heavy in this car. It's a very physical, mechanical feeling car. In a way that's generally pretty pleasant actually, and especially on the move you don't really notice that stuff. No power assist, so the steering's quite heavy.
While 200 horsepower doesn't seem like much today, the car feels extremely special from the moment you touch the shift knob for the first time. The control forces are heavy, the shifter feels mechanical, precise, and substantial. It is a physical car to drive, certainly more physical effort than a Ferrari 308 or any 911 of the era, and just a notch behind the Countach, which has to be the benchmark for high control forces.
If you're going neither very slow nor very fast, it's actually relatively easy to drive. The control forces lighten up appreciably. If it has a nice rotating chassis, can we say rotating? Well, I've just done so. It has a nice rotating chassis, it's easy to control, and great traction, of course, since it's four-wheel drive. It does have quite a lot of turbo lag, like anything of this era does with this level of control. I think it runs Bosch K-Jet, which is this sort of mechanical system, effectively. And so it's not the most intelligent system, and with that comes a relatively laggy motor. That is very dramatic, of course, but if you catch the motor off guard, then it's not a real happy camper for sure.
At speed, all this melts away, and the Turbo 16 is a car that works well when hustled. At low RPM, there's not much power, but boost builds progressively rather than explosively, eventually delivering a healthy shove in the upper rev range. Unlike many turbocharged cars, especially vintage ones, it never runs out of breath and revs fairly high, 7,000 RPM. The result is an epic rush to redline followed by a terrific bang as flames shoot out of the exhaust during the pause between gear changes. It is pure vintage rally car magic.
Perhaps one of the most surprising things about the 205 Turbo 16 is that it's not a huge sensory overload unless you're really hauling the mail. It's loud, but not insanely loud. You don't get wild turbo noises, but you do get wild turbo lag. It has the characteristics of any motor that's reasonably high state of tune that's also turbocharged. So here we go, we're at 3,000 RPM in first gear. We'll just mat it. So there it is, matted, 3, 4, 5, and we're off.
Driven neatly, the Turbo 16 is not a scary car, although its reputation suggests that perhaps it eventually reaches that point if you ask enough of it. I surely did not. At 7 or 8 tenths, it is engaging, confidence-inspiring, and feels incredibly special. True driver's car. Brakes are heavy but do work, pedals are positioned nicely for heel towing, while chassis balance and response are excellent.
Handling balance is really a pleasure, actually, at least up to, call it 7 or 8 tenths, which is about as far as I took this car. It's easy to control, you can change the balance, and it's quite adjustable. It's very responsive to the throttle, and overall it's kind of a fun car to drive, actually.
Changing throttle position in a corner adjusts the line of the car in a useful way that allows the driver to place the car precisely and play around a bit. It really comes into its own at speed. The low-speed clumsiness metamorphosizes into a joyful sports car experience that puts every Ferrari of the era this side of a 288 or F40 to shame.
The 205 Turbo 16 fully reflects the fact that it's a homologated race car. It's not the easiest car to drive, it's not also the hardest car to drive, but what it certainly delivers is a great deal of excitement and drama, and that's all before you even get in it. The looks are just sensational. I mean, it has this muscular, hunkered down look, which is unmatched by anything in any era, in my opinion. Do I want one? I mean, yes, absolutely. This thing is so cool, and that's before you even get to what it looks like, because it looks like absolutely bonkers, like every Group B homologation car should.
Setting aside the risks of driving while blindfolded, if I drove this car while blindfolded, I'd be shocked when my eyes were uncovered because the experience is so exotic in feel. The muscular looks are sensational, but the fundamental shape is that of a hatchback, and that sort of sums up the Turbo 16 neatly. On one hand, it's very physical to drive, especially at low speeds, yet it also has a delicacy and communicativeness underway that makes it very rewarding to drive quickly. That it also happens to be a road-going version of one of the ultimate cars from the ultimate era of rallying only adds to the magic.